Hello, everyone. Rabba Wendy Amsellem teaches Talmud Halacha at Yeshivat Maharat and is the editor of Yeshivat Maharat's Keren journal. She is also a faculty member at Drisha and at Pardes, and she is an editor at the Lair House. Wendy received smicha from Yeshivat Maharat and is an alumna of the Drisha Scholar Circle and its high school program. She's a BA in History and Literature from Harvard University, an old friend, a really honored colleague, and really happy that you're with us at Anshe Sholom this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. It's quite a pleasure to be here, especially also with Rabba Leah and also with Dr. Scholfeld, my colleagues from Maharat. Yeah, it's been actually just a really lovely Shabbat here, so thank you all very much. When I was thinking about tonight, I was thinking that when I was a kid growing up, Selichot always felt to me like a very sort of heavy time. Like you'd come to shul and you'd think about all the things that you had done the previous year that you regretted and you kind of felt sad about it, and it was like just like kind of a time of sort of heaviness. And then a number of years ago, I went to Selichot at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, and for anybody who's ever been there on Selichot night, they have a concert for like 2 or 3 hours beforehand that's led by the Chazan there, Eli Kranzler, and it was a totally different feeling in the room. Instead of it feeling kind of heavy and sad, there was kind of a lot of joy and a lot of optimism, and there was this sort of sense of, like Selichot could be about not just kind of all of your regrets from the previous year, but kind of about how freeing it could be to really think about being able to change something about yourself and to really believe that you could kind of make the upcoming year be very different. And there's sort of like a real joy in that. And I know that this year you guys are going to have a kumzitz right before Selichot, and so I'm hoping that we can kind of approach Selichot with that same sort of sense of possibility and optimism. And I thought, kind of in line with that, it would be interesting for us to spend some time looking together at an agadah that is about a person who's able to effect kind of a sweeping personal transformation. So this is one of my favorite rabbinic stories. It appears in Avot Rabbi Natan. And for people who aren't familiar with Avot Rabbi Natan basically functions as a work of Midrash on Pirkei Avot, on the Mishnayot of Masechet Avot. And the dating of it is a little tricky because some parts of it are very, very early. Some parts of it seem to be Tannaitic, which is kind of early 3rd century or so. But most scholars think it was kind of actually fully compiled quite a bit later, probably sometime between the 7th and the 9th centuries. But it basically works as a midrash on the Mishnayot, and this particular passage is a midrash on the 4th Mishnah in the 1st chapter of Avot. That Mishnah reads, Yossi ben Yoezer ish Tzreda Omer, right? Yossi ben Yoezer from Tzreda would say the following thing: Yehi beitcha beitvad l'chachamim. You should make your home into a meeting place for sages. Vehevei mitabek ba'afar ragleihem, and you should hug the dust of their legs. Vehevei shoteh b'tzama divreihem, and you should drink their words with great thirst. And this particular story is kind of a riff on the idea of drinking the words of the sages with great thirst. And that's where our text over here begins, the first text on the page. I have some water here. Okay, so the first text over here is from Avot Rabbi Natan. And it starts off with Davar Acher, another interpretation, V'shoteh b'tzama divreihem, drink the words of the sages with thirst. Amru alav al Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, it was said about Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Kishebikesh lumod Torah, at the time that he started wanting to learn Torah, Chorshim harbe hayu la'aviv, v'hu haya choresh bitrashim. His father was apparently a wealthy landowner. He employed many different workers who were plowing the fields, and Eliezer was one of the people plowing the fields, and he was plowing the very stony fields, the trashim. And in the midst of all this plowing and all this agricultural work, we're told, Yashav lo v'haya bocheh. He just kind of sits down in the middle of the field, kind of right near his plow, and he just starts to cry. Amar lo aviv, so his father sees his son Eliezer crying there in the middle of the field, and he says to him, B'ni mipnei ma ta bocheh? My son, why are you crying? Shema mitzte'er ata shata choresh bitrashim. Oh, perhaps the reason why you're crying is that you're working too hard, right? You're plowing this really stony ground that's too hard for you. Lemachar bo v'charosh agav ma'aneh. Tomorrow you'll plow the fields that have already been plowed. I guess maybe you'd plow things twice, and it was easier once it had been plowed initially to plow the second time. And so his father says, don't worry, I'll make things better for you. Now, I always think this first interaction is really interesting, right? Because you get the sense that his father cares a lot about him and kind of wants to make things better for him. But he's kind of doing it the way that I think a lot of us do sometimes, right? Which is that if somebody that we care about seems to be in trouble, we so much want to help them that we kind of jump in to help them even before we actually know what their problem is, right? So his father kind of doesn't give him a chance to answer and say why he's crying. He says, oh, I know why you must be crying, and I will already fix it for you, right? So he fixes it for him, and he sends him to work the next day plowing the fields that have already been plowed. But it turns out that the next day, while he's plowing these fields that have already been plowed, Yashav lo al gav ma'aneh, he sits down on top of one of the furrows. Eliezer sits down, v'haya bocheh, and he's crying again. And his father sees him crying again, and now the father's really confused, right? Because he thought he had solved all the problems. And so his father says to him, Ma ta bocheh, right? You're crying, right? What's going on? Why are you crying now? I thought we had solved the trouble. And Eliezer says, She'ani mevakesh l'lmod Torah. I am crying because what I really want to do with my life is learn Torah. I don't want to be working in the fields. I want to be learning Torah. His father doesn't think this is a great plan. His father says to him, "V'harei ben chavchet shanim ata." His father says, "Look, you're already 28 years old. That's late to start this career of learning Torah. V'ata mevakesh l'lmod Torah. Now you want to start learning Torah? Ela lech v'kach lecha isha. Rather, here's a plan. I can fix things for you. Go and get married. V'holi mimena banim, have children with this woman that you marry. V'holichan lebeit hasefer, and you can bring your children to school, and your children will learn Torah." Right? So, I have a plan for you. We can solve your trouble. You yourself can't learn Torah. It's too late for you. But if you have kids, you can have them learn Torah. Now, what's interesting about this is that the father is not saying, I think that spending time learning Torah is a waste of time. He's not saying that, because he seems to be quite happy with the thought of his grandchildren learning Torah. But he doesn't think that it's the right thing for Eliezer, right? He thinks it's kind of too late for Eliezer. He's already 28. He can't do it, but perhaps, his children could. Hayam mitzta'er gimel Shabbatot. So Eliezer is very, very sad for 3 weeks. Ad shenigle alav Eliyahu, until Eliyahu Hanavi shows up and says to him, Alei lecha etzel ben Zakkai lYerushalayim. You should go and learn with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in Jerusalem. Now, this is kind of an interesting appearance of Eliyahu, because often in rabbinic stories, when Eliyahu appears, it's in order to do some sort of miracle, right? Something's going on, Eliyahu appears, he catches somebody when they're falling out of a window, he kind of does all sorts of miraculous things. Here, he's not doing anything miraculous, right? He's just kind of giving a message, and the message seems to be something that Eliezer himself already wants, right, but kind of doesn't think he can get to on his own, right? His father says you're too old to start, and he's just sad about it, right? But he doesn't feel like he can kind of push back or do anything different until Eliyahu shows up and says, you should go and learn with Ben Zakkai in Jerusalem. So sure enough, Eliezer heads off to Jerusalem to learn with Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he gets to Yochanan ben Zakkai, and what does he do when he arrives? He cries, right? This is what, right? Eliezer, it's hard for him to say the things that he wants, right? So when he gets there, right, that was the kind of Inchoate Yearning in the title, right? He wants something, but it's just very hard for him to express it. So he gets to Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he sits in front of him, and he starts crying. So Yochanan ben Zakkai tries to get some more information out of this person who's come before him. He says to him, Ben miata, who are you, right? Who's your father? Velo higilo, and Eliezer doesn't answer. Right? And it's interesting that he doesn't answer it, and it seems like one of the kind of central questions of the story is going to be kind of who really is Eliezer's father, right? Biologically, we know that his father is Hyrcanus, but like at this moment in time, he doesn't seem to want to be claiming Hyrcanus as his father, right? He's looking for some other kind of guidance, so he won't respond and say his father's name. So then Yochanan ben Zakkai asks him the next question, Ma ta bocheh, ma tevakesh, right? What are you crying? What is it why are you crying? What is it that you want? And then, unlike Hyrcanus the father, it seems that Yochanan ben Zakkai waits long enough for Eliezer to come up with an answer, right? He doesn't say, oh, I know why you must be crying. Instead, he kind of waits. And Eliezer says, Lilmod Torah. The thing that I really want to do, the reason why I'm crying is that I want to learn Torah. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him now, Miyamecha lo nichnasta lebeit hasefer, velo lamadata kriyat shema, velo tefillah, velo birkat hamazon. So he says to him, well, have you learned anything at all? Right? Have you ever gone to school and perhaps learned, and this is interesting that these are thought of as kind of the basic bits of knowledge of Jewish texts, right? Have you learned to recite the Shema? Have you learned to pray? And have you learned to recite the grace after meals? Right? These 3 kind of very basic things. And Eliezer says, Love, no, I've never learned any of these things. Which is interesting, right? Because it seems that his father is very wealthy, He has all these people working on his fields. It seems that his father isn't kind of opposed to the idea of Torah knowledge, right? The thought that the potential grandchildren would go learn Torah seems fine. But even these very basic things have not been taught to Eliezer. And so even though he's learned literally nothing at all, he still knows enough to know that he wants to learn Torah, right? And I think that's a really interesting part of the story, right? It always reminds me of like when you hear about like kids when they're small kind of just knowing that they want to be like football players. And you're like, how do you even know that, right? But it seems like Eliezer just knows that he wants to learn Torah, even though he's learned nothing at all. And I think this might be part of what the story is alluding to when he talks about drinking the words of the sage with thirst, right? There's a sense that when a baby's born, before the baby knows anything else about the world, the baby knows how to be thirsty and how to drink. And there's a sense that what it means to drink the words of the sages with thirst is to want Torah in such a primal way that even though you've never been exposed to it at all, you know that you want it, in the same way that a baby kind of knows that it wants to drink even though it hasn't drunk yet. Okay, so turns out, though, that even though Eliezer really wants to learn Torah, he's learned nothing at all before. And interestingly, Yochanan ben Zakkai doesn't kind of send him to like the primary school down the street. Instead, we're told, Amad v'limdo shloshtam. Immediately, Yochanan ben Zakkai teaches him these three things, right? Three basic things: Kriyat Shema, prayer, and Birkat Hamazon. After he's learned these three things, then Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him, Ma ta mevakesh, likrot or lishnot? So now Yochanan ben Zakkai says, well, in order to kind of continue your learning, would you rather focus on what the text calls likrot, right, learning Torah, learning Mikra, or lishnot, or learning halacha, right? Do you want to focus on Torah? Do you want to focus on halacha? Amar lo lishnot. And Eliezer says, I want to focus on halacha. I want to learn Mishnah. Hayam melamdo shtei halachot kol yemot Shabbat. So every day of the week, every weekday, Yochanan ben Zakkai teaches Eliezer 2 laws, 2 halachot. V'Shabbat hayachozer aleim medavkan. And on Shabbat, Eliezer would go over the 12 laws that he learned this week until they really stuck with him. The next week, he would learn 2 more laws every day. I've left out 1 or 2 lines here in the interest of time. But basically, what the story goes on to say over here is that Eliezer is so focused on his learning that he just doesn't eat anything. He's just all he wants to do is learn Torah. And because he hasn't eaten anything in many days, he starts to develop very bad breath. And when he starts to develop very bad breath, Yochanan ben Zakkai kind of doesn't want to sit so close to him, so he sends him all the way to the other side of the room. What would you imagine Eliezer ben Hyrcanus' reaction to that would be? He starts to cry again, right? And eventually they figure out that the reason why he has this really bad breath is that he hasn't been eating, and then Yochanan ben Zakkai invites him to eat with him every day. Okay, and then the story continues where we are. Amru banav shel Hyrcanus lavihem. Now, Eliezer apparently has other brothers, right? His father, Hyrcanus, has other sons. So the other sons say to their father, Lech unidei et Eliezer minechasecha. They say, actually, you should go and disown Eliezer, right? We're all here working hard, plowing the ground, planting the fields. Eliezer's run off to Jerusalem, totally abandoned the family farm. So if he doesn't want to work the field, like, you should disown him. He shouldn't be able to kind of have a share in the family lands. So go to Jerusalem and disown Eliezer. His father takes their advice. Alal Yerushalayim, he goes up to Jerusalem, lindoto min chasav, to disown him from all of his possessions. And on the day that he happens to arrive, it turns out, Matzah Sham Yom Tov Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. It turns out that it's a sort of a festival day for Yochanan ben Zakkai. It's kind of almost like a day of open learning, right? Everybody has kind of come to Yochanan ben Zakkai's Beit Midrash to learn with him. V'chol gdolei hamedina misubin etzlo, and all of the great ones, all of the kind of nobles of the country, are all sitting in front of Yochanan ben Zakkai learning Torah with him. Ve'eluhein, and here are some of the important people who were there: Ben Tzitzit HaKasef, V'Natimon Ben Gurion, Uben Kalba Savua, right? Important, kind of wealthy members of the community have all shown up on that day. Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, halchu v'amru Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, harei aviv shel Rabbi Eliezer ba. So now 2 other students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of them is Rabbi Yoshua, the other one is Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel. They both see Hyrcanus appearing, and they go to their teacher and they say, the father of Rabbi Eliezer is here. Now you'll notice that in the intro, he's gone from being Eliezer to now being Rabbi Eliezer, right? So Rabbi Eliezer's father has shown up, right? So probably some good amount of time has elapsed. Amar lahen asulo makom. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, well, make room for Hyrcanus to sit, make space for him. V'asulo makom. So Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Shimon make space for Hyrcanus to sit. V'hoshivu etzlo beinehem, and they basically seat him kind of right next to them. Amar lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So now Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai turns to Eliezer and he says, Eliezer, emor lanu davar echad midivrei Torah. Eliezer, teach us some Torah, right? Teach us some Torah. Now, presumably, why is he doing this? Exactly. He wants to kind of let Eliezer show off for his father. His father's there, so he says, come, address everybody, teach us some Torah. Eliezer answers and he says, Amarlo, emshol lecha mashal lema ani domeh. He says, let me give you a parable, right? To what can I be compared? Lebor hazeh she'ino yachol lahotzi mayim yoter mima shehu machnis. I am like a pit, like a cistern, that can only hold the water that's been put into it, right? So he's basically telling Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, it doesn't make any sense for me to teach anything because I don't have any original thoughts, right? All I do is I hold the water that you pour into me. So if I were to get up and teach, at best, all I could do is kind of display the water that you've given me, but I have nothing of my own to offer, so it doesn't make any sense for you to ask me to get up and teach. I think this is another really interesting moment in the story, right? You get the sense that Rabbi Eliezer's sense of self is that he is just this vessel that holds other people's Torah, right? That is what he believes himself to be as a student. And his teacher says, no. His teacher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, says to him, no, let me give you a different parable, right? To what can you actually be compared? Right? You are not like an empty cistern that just holds other people's water. Instead, you're like a living well that overflows and brings out its own water, right? Water here, of course, being a symbol for Torah, right? You're not just holding other people's Torah, you yourself are your own living well. Right? You have so much of your own living water. If you were to teach, you would be able to say Torah not just more than what I taught you, but actually things that even Moses at Sinai did not know. Right? You have sort of so much creative force in your Torah learning, you could say totally new things. Amar lo bet v'gimel pamim v'lo kibel. But Eliezer just doesn't believe him, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai tells him a second and a third time, and each time Eliezer says, no, I don't know what you're talking about, right? I'm just an empty cistern holding your Torah. I don't have anything of my own to say. There's nothing I can offer. Yatsa Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai v'halach. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai leaves the room. Now, why does he do that? Well, sorry?
So that Eliezer will have to teach.
Right, exactly. So it could be that he leaves because then Eliezer won't have any choice, right? There's no one else teaching, so maybe he'll have to step forward. Right? Any other ideas about why Yochanan ben Zakkai might be leaving?
Sternum, frustration.
Right, maybe he's kind of frustrated, right? You tell somebody something 2 or 3 times, they totally don't listen to you, right? Maybe you're just annoyed with them and you want to go.
Maybe he thinks he's intimidating the student.
Yeah, right, or it could be that he thinks that maybe in his presence, Eliezer doesn't think he has anything to say, but maybe if his teacher wasn't standing there, he would actually be able to, feel more confident in his abilities, right? So I think all those are totally possible within the story, right? Yochanan ben Zakkai walks out, and then we're told, sure enough, Hayar Rabbi Eliezer Yoshev v'Dorish, Dvarim Yoter mima shenemar leMoshe b'Sinai. Rabbi Eliezer then actually does begin to sit and teach, and he's teaching things that are even more than what was told to Moses at Sinai. Upanav me'irot ke'or hachama. And when Rabbi Eliezer begins to start teaching, his face shines like the light of the sun. The karnotav yotzot ke'karnotav shel Moshe. The rays of light are radiating out from Eliezer's face, just like the rays of light were radiating out from Moshe's face when he taught Torah. Ve'en adam yodea im yom hu ve'im laila. There's so much light radiating from Rabbi Eliezer's face that people can't even tell if it's day or night, right? There's like sun streaming out from his face. So the other students are all very excited. We're told Rabbi Yoshuva, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, halchu v'amru Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, bo'u ra'eh, right? So the 2 students, Rabbi Yoshuva and Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, they run off, they find Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and they say, you have to come and see. Rabbi Eliezer, Yoshev v'doresh dvarim yoter mima shenemar leMoshe b'Sinai. Rabbi Eliezer is sitting and teaching things that were not even told to Moses at Sinai. Upanav me'irot ke'or hachama. His face is shining like the light of the sun. V'karnotav yotzot ke'karnotav shel Moshe. Rays of light are radiating forth just like the rays of light of Moshe. Ve'en adam yodea im yom hu ve'im laila. People don't know if it's day or night, right? It's amazing. And Ba Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai me'acharav. This is another great detail in the story, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is careful to come in from behind, right? Which I think is important, right? You get the sense that he knows that if he comes in from the front and Eliezer were to see him, right, Eliezer might not be able to continue, right? So he very deliberately comes in from behind, so that way he can hear Eliezer before Eliezer sees him. Unishako al rosho, and then he kisses Rabbi Eliezer on his head, and he says, Ashreichem Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov sheyatza ze mechalatzeichem. He says, fortunate are you, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that this is your descendant. Right? And this again gets back to that question of who is Eliezer's father, right? And here, Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying your true fathers are Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? And they are so fortunate to have you as their descendant. So now suddenly Hyrcanus, the actual father, perks up and he says, L'mi atem omrim kach? To whom are they saying, fortunate are you, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that this is your descendant? And the people around him say, Libincha Eliezer. Oh, they're saying that to your son Eliezer. Hyrcanus says, V'kach hayat tzarich lomar, Ashreichem, right, says, this is really what should be said. Ashreichem Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, she'yatza ze mechalatzeichem, lo hayat tzarich lomar. Right? He shouldn't have said, fortunate are you, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that this is your descendant. Ella ashrei ani sheyatza mechalatzai. No, they should have said, fortunate am I, that he's my descendant, right? That he's come forth from my body. Right? So there's a sense that Hyrcanus, right? Hyrcanus wants to claim, right? Remember, Hyrcanus has come in order to disown Eliezer, but now he very much wants to claim him as his son, right? He says, no, I want to be known as the father of Eliezer. Don't say, fortunate are you, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Isaac, and Jacob, that this is your son. Say, fortunate am I that he's my son. Meanwhile, Rabbi Eliezer is continuing to sit and teach, and his father has sort of stood up to make this proclamation, and he remains standing. Eliezer sees his father standing, and he says, Abba, eni yachol liot yoshev v'doresh v'lomed divrei Torah v'ata omed al reglecha. He says, Father, I can't continue to sit and teach Torah while you are standing. Amad v'hoshivo etzlo. So he goes and he brings his father, and he seats him right next to him, kind of at the front as they're teaching Torah. And his father, Hyrcanus, is now beginning to feel a little bit uncomfortable, right? Because Hyrcanus, remember, has come to town to disown Eliezer, and now he's kind of being honored as the father of Eliezer, and it doesn't feel so good to him. So he says to his son, Bini lo bati l'shevach hazeh. He says, my son, I don't really deserve this honor. V'lo bati ela lindotcha mi nechasai. Actually, the reason why I came to Jerusalem was to disown you from all of my property. It's a little awkward. But now, though, that I've come and I've seen you and I've rejoiced in your Torah learning, actually, I'm going to disown the rest of your brothers, and I'm going to give you all of my property as a gift, right? Because I'm so happy with your Torah studies. Amar lo, so Eliezer answers and he says, Mutzal ani ad shani shaveh lekol echad mehem. He says, actually, no, I don't want to accept any property unless I and my brothers all share in it equally. And now he says this interesting thing to his father. He says, Ilu bikashti milifnei hamakom kesef v'zahav, hayalo litei. He says, look, if really what I had wanted was wealth, right, if what I actually wanted was gold and silver, if that was the thing that I could have asked God for, hayalo litei, right, God could have, right, if I had asked for gold and silver, God had the ability to give me gold and silver. Shenemar li hakesef v'liazahav, right, there's a pasuk in the book of Haggai where God says, all the gold and silver belongs to me, and so if what I really wanted was wealth, I could have asked God for wealth. Ilu bikashti mimenu karkaot, and if what I really wanted was land, God also has land to give me, because the verse in Psalm says, L'Hashem ha'aretz umloa, God owns all the land, and so, if I wanted land, I could have asked God for that. Lo bikashti mimenu ela she'ezkeh leTorah, but the one thing that I really wanted, that I was able to ask God for, is I wanted to be able to merit to learn Torah. Shene'emar al kein kol pikudei kol yisharti kol orach sheker saniti. Right? Because, as the verse says, I prize your laws, right? The thing that I most value is learning your laws. And so I got the thing that I most wanted, and so I don't need all of your land, right? The thing that I most wanted was to learn Torah. I was able to ask God for it, and that's in fact what I received. Now, it's interesting that at the end of the story, he describes it as I was able to ask God for it, given at the beginning, it didn't seem so clear that he was able to ask for anything, right? In the end, he looks back on it as I was able to kind of formulate this request. But I think one of the things that's most interesting about the story is that in the beginning, he really doesn't have the words, right? All he can kind of do in the beginning is to cry. So the reason why I thought the story was a good story to begin with tonight is that I think it's a story where a person is able to kind of very dramatically change their lives, but there's a sense that the story kind of outlines all the different obstacles that you can kind of face, right, in terms of wanting to make a change. I think the first thing, and kind of the really interesting starting point of the story is that it seems that there's a sense sometimes that we know that we want things in our lives to be different, but it's kind of hard to even put into words exactly what we want to change, right? We just have this kind of feeling that there's a possibility that something could be better for us than it is at the moment, but it's really hard to know exactly even how to say it. And if you can't say the thing that you want, it's kind of hard to get to it, right? So in the beginning, when all Eliezer can do is cry, right, his father can't help him, right? It's hard for anyone to help him because he doesn't even have the words to describe what it is that he wants. And so kind of a major step forward for him is on that second day when he's crying again and his father says, "Why are you crying?" Once he's actually able even just to say the words, "What I want to do is learn Torah," he's already in a much better state, right? So the story seems to be saying kind of the first kind of step towards really changing something is being able to kind of put into words for yourself the thing that you want. And then the story goes on, I think, to make the point that even once you can sort of put into words the things that you want, it's not always clear to us that we're able to kind of make that change, right? Even once Eliezer is able to say that he wants to learn Torah, right, he can't kind of get to the point of being able to do it, right? His father says, no, you're too old, and he's really sad about it, right? But he kind of can't really do anything about it, right? He feels kind of helpless to bring about the change that he wants. And I think that's why there's that interesting moment in the story where Eliyahu Hanavi has to show up, right? Only basically to kind of say in words what he kind of wants to be doing, right? Right? It just kind of gets this verbal encouragement of you should go and learn with Yochanan and Zakkai. And as soon as he says it, right, then Eliezer is able to go, right? It's not that he like miraculously brings him to Jerusalem, right? It seems like Eliezer can kind of get there on his own, but he can't kind of mentally get there until he gets this encouragement from Eliyahu. I think maybe the story is suggesting that, even once we can kind of put into words the changes that we want, it still could be hard to kind of make the next step. And then the story goes on, I think, to say that, even once we can put into words what we want and kind of actually set out to do it, there are all sorts of other obstacles, right? First of all, kind of practically, often we need help, right? He needs Yochanan and Zakkai to agree to teach him, right? Otherwise, he's not going to be able to get the Torah that he wants. But I think kind of the most interesting part of the story is that even once Yochanan ben Zakkai kind of agrees to teach him, there's a sense that the way that he thinks about himself is kind of the biggest obstacle for him, right? He thinks of himself as just kind of an empty hole holding on to other people's Torah. And as long as that's what he believes about himself, he kind of can't ever move past it. And this is what I thought, one of the things that Rabba Nitzarna said today that I thought was really beautiful this morning is that a big part of what we do during Elul is we try to kind of change the story that we tell about ourselves. And it seems to me that that's what's going on in this story, right? As long as the story that Eliezer tells about himself is that I'm just an empty cistern holding other people's Torah, he's kind of stuck with that, right? There's no way for him to begin to teach and to kind of share his own thoughts. He doesn't even know that he has the capacity to have his own thoughts. But as soon as he's willing to kind of try and sort of stretch himself and kind of change the narrative that he has for himself, it turns out that he's able to do these amazing things, right? He's able to kind of teach things that are even more than were taught to Moshe or taught by Moshe at Sinai. And there's a sense that, he begins kind of unable to even articulate what kind of change he wants, and in the end he's able to kind of get to a change that's kind of even more than his dreams, right? He wanted to learn Torah, but it doesn't seem like he could have even imagined that he could become sort of an original teacher of Torah, and by the end of the story he's kind of gotten there. And when he talks to his father at the end, he seems to be saying, this is kind of my dream, right? Owning all of your land was not my dream. I don't need that gift that you're giving me. My dream was to be able to sort of merit having Torah, and I'm able to kind of even exceed my own dream, right? My dream was to be able to learn Torah, right? And now I'm actually even able to teach Torah, and it seems that he is, he's kind of gotten to a point that is even more than he could have wanted for himself. If you look at the next text on the page, one of the things that is, I think, very interesting about, right, so remember, Avot Rabbi Natan functions as a midrash on Masechet Avot. So the first part, the story kind of is a riff on the idea of drinking the rabbi's words with thirst. But for people who are familiar with Pirkei Avot, you might remember that Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is described in this second source over here, in the second parak of Mishnah Avot. We're told that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 main students, and these are the 5 that are listed, right? There's Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. right? So he has 5 students, 3 of whom appear in this story, right? Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is the main person who the story is about. And if you remember, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel are those 2 students who see Hyrcanus amongst them and so forth. Okay, so in the Mishnah, this is the way they are described. Hu haya moneh shivcha. Right, this is the way Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would praise his students. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus borsid she'eino me'abed tipa. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is a cistern that does not lose a single drop. His different words of praise for the next 3, and then Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach is described as a ma'ayan mitgaber, as a spring that kind of overflows. Hu haya omer im yiyu kol chachmei Yisrael b'chaf maznayim ve'Eliezer ben Hyrcanus b'chaf shniya machriya et kulam. Right, so it was told in the name of Yochanan ben Zakkai that if all of the sages of Israel were put on one side of a scale, and just Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus on his own was on the other side, Eliezer ben Hyrcanus would kind of outweigh everybody. But Abba Shaul says, no, actually, really what was cited in the name of Yochanan ben Zakkai is that if all the sages of Israel were on one side of a scale, and even Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was with them, but Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach was on the other side, Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, he's the one who would outweigh all of them. So the Mishnah in the end seems to be privileging the idea of the kind of overflowing spring over the cistern that doesn't lose anything. But in this Mishnah, Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is kind of described as the cistern, right? And Eliezer ben Arach, a totally different person, is the kind of overflowing spring. So what I think is interesting is that in the Mishnah kind of, presents Eliezer ben Hyrcanus just kind of the way he originally described himself, right? It's a cistern that holds other people's water, right? It's valuable because it doesn't lose anything, but it's not capable of doing any original thought. But in the Midrash, right, the Midrash in Avot de Rabbi Natan kind of takes this Mishnah as a starting point, right? It says, yeah, it's true that in the beginning, at one point in time, Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was in fact a cistern, but he was able to change himself, right? He was able to kind of go beyond. Go beyond his first achievement, right? It was great in the beginning that he was able to hold on to so much Torah, but the story kind of imagines him even being able to kind of stretch beyond that and become more like kind of a hero of this Mishnah of Eliezer ben Arach, who is the overflowing spring. And the next text over here is a story not about Eliezer, but it's about the education of Rabbi Akiva. And one of the things I think is kind of interesting in general about the Talmud is the Talmud seems to be invested in these stories of personal transformation, right? The sense of specifically of great rabbis who start learning Torah relatively later in their lives and kind of become wildly successful at it. And I think the reason why these stories are told is that I think they are meant to kind of encourage everybody, right? At different points, whatever point you find yourself in your life, it is never too late to kind of start learning Torah. But one of the things that's interesting if we were to sort of compare a little bit the story of Eliezer's education with the story of Rabbi Akiva's is that Eliezer is described very much as a person who has a very strong desire to learn Torah, right? He can't necessarily kind of put it into words in the beginning, but it's a deeply felt desire, right? It is like the baby's desire for milk, right? He thirsts for Torah and he really wants it. Whereas if we look in one moment at the story of Rabbi Akiva, he's not described in that way at all. And I guess before we look at this one, does anybody have any sort of thoughts or comments about Eliezer ben Hyrcanus? Okay, yeah, sorry.
I think the story should be I feel like I've seen the movie before of the parents own a mattress shop, and the kid wants to be a poet, you can't go to college, but you have to help your brothers and run the mattress shop, and you run, I don't know, I think I've seen that movie before.
Yeah, so. Totally. Right, and it is interesting that, he does sort of abandon the mattress shop, and...
I really like the thing of him living his own dream rather than living through his kids, because that can be a way to put off tshuva, to say, well, in the next generation it'll be better, and say, no, I'm not going to raise my kids to learn Torah, I'm going to learn Torah.
Yeah.
I've seen that movie too.
Yeah. Right, and I think that's a particularly interesting point, because that's something that for many generations women were told, right? You can't learn Torah, but you can bring your sons to learn Torah, and that's the way you'll kind of fulfill your desire to learn Torah. Right. Yeah, totally.
I feel like, this might be my psych perspective coming into it.
We can't hear.
I'll repeat also, yeah.
I feel like in terms of a psych perspective, here's this guy who just cries. He can't really say what he's feeling or say what he really wants. He's just crying, showing emotion or whatever. And then you ask him to spit out what he learns, and again, he can't. He says, I just keep everything inside of me. It seems like he doesn't know how to portray himself and how to be that person who he wants to be, except via like emotions that he might not even know what he is trying to say. So then he gets into this Torah study and he feels like he can take everything in, but then when asked to share it, he struggles. He's a very like internal, guy, and it's interesting that from that the light still sheds from him, because that's something else that is not in words. That's something you can see, something you can hear, like an emotion necessarily. You can't put it into words. And it's interesting that he gets that, similarity to emotion, and it makes me wonder about emotion. Why, the light went from him also.
Interesting. Okay, did everybody in the back hear Carly's point? What was that? Did everybody hear Carly's point? Should we repeat it? Or, yeah. So that's a really interesting idea, right? That he seems to kind of be holding everything inside. Yeah. Yeah, right. That I hadn't thought about that, right? The connection between his inability to put into words his initial yearning with later on his like feeling like he can't share his. Yeah. I guess I saw that as not just that he couldn't share, but I thought it seemed to me that he doesn't even think he has anything to share, right? He just feels like he can just repeat, what Yochanan ben Zakkai said, but he can't sort of generate anything new. Yeah, please.
So maybe just even following on what she was just saying, because the question was, why did he mention his dad? And I think that there really is some kind of internal inhibition, because his dad really said, hey, you cannot do it. So the thing is, by him naming his dad, so then there would be even more of a blockage, an emotional blockage happening. And then the second thought of mine is Hyrcanus. Maybe it's kind of such a non-Jewish name, so the thing is that would really give him away as really, or a family that really, that is not keeping the studies up.
But he then named his son.
Right. Eliezer then names his own son Hyrcanus. It's hard to say. I mean, it's a good point, right? Hyrcanus itself sounds like a Greek name, but there are lots of rabbinic scholars who have Greek names, and so it's not always necessarily an indicator. But I totally agree with you, especially given that his son doesn't even know how to recite Kriyat Shema, right? So it sounds as if it's not a household that is kind of steeped in Jewish practice, right? If that's the case. But it is also interesting that he on his own, right, when Eliezer says, I want to learn Torah, his father doesn't say, total waste of time, right? He just says, it's too late for you, which is maybe kind of a way of just kind of fending him off. But I think it's interesting, right? He's kind of willing to sort of entertain the possibility of Eliezer's children doing it. But I really like your first point also, right? That the idea is that if when he's first being interviewed by Yochanan ben Zakkai, if he were to say his father's name, that would kind of bring along with it all of the baggage of his father saying, you can't do this thing. And he kind of wants to start without that weighing him down. It's a really good point.
It could be that it's a residual effect still, that even afterwards really doesn't trust himself to be then overflowing with creativity because of all of those internal inhibitions created by his dad.
That is really interesting, right? So maybe what he hears his father saying is not just that you're too old to start, but this is not something you can do. And if you're told that it's not something you can do, it's hard to kind of believe about yourself that you can. Or even say,
it's interesting at the end when he is answering his father, he's very articulate. He speaks for a long time relative to anything else he says in the story, right? He's usually answering in like 2-word sentences. And even when he says, he's responding to the request to teach, it's like a one line, I can't do that on a cistern. And here he's like quoting Sukkim, he like goes on for a very long time. I think he by that point you can really see that he's like a different person just by the way he's talking and like the length at which he is talking.
Yeah, that's a really great point, right? There's a sense almost that like something that was like stopped up in him is now kind of flowing, like the water is flowing. He can say things, and also that he reaches out and kind of claims his father, right? He says, you have to come sit with me. I can't teach with you.
He
Kind of stand.
initiates speech there.
Yeah.
He initiates.
It's Moshe Rabbeinu, really, in some sense. Moshe Rabbeinu and Dvarim, he's just kind of sprouting out.
Interesting. That's great. Right. There are these great midrashim about how the people of Israel say to Moshe, in the beginning you said you couldn't talk at all. How you just won't stop talking, right? So there's a sense, right, that something opens in Moshe also, and he's able to speak. Yeah.
The story doesn't really address at all what changed. We understand, we see the circumstance in which he changed, right? He was sort of left on his own to do it. But what changed in him that he didn't just sit down and be quiet when his teacher left?
Oh, that's interesting. So my sense is, I think in the beginning, the first change is that he's able to kind of even, right, because in the beginning all he can do is cry, right? So once he can at least kind of articulate a goal for himself, that makes it that kind of sets him up to be on the path where then Eliyahu can say, oh, that's your goal, you can actually go and do it, and that gets him to the place where he's able to start working on the goal. Yeah, my sense is that at the point at which Yochanan ben Zakkai asks him to teach and he says no, he knows that he has Torah in him, he just doesn't think he has any original Torah, right? And so I think that kind of, he's now in a different place than he was when he was crying on the field. Even if Yochanan ben Zakkai had walked away, he wouldn't have been able to say anything because he didn't have the knowledge. But then I think the story kind of says that even once he has the knowledge, he's still not able to really act on it until he somehow is able to shift his sense of self. And what about that moment changes? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's that. I think someone here suggested, right, that once his teacher leaves, he kind of feels like now it's up to him, so he kind of starts, and that's how he does it. It's a good question, though, right? What else do you think could have changed in that moment? Yeah?
I would say, actually, that the reading is kind of indicating here in the story itself, something changed. I think it's a deep internal change, because he didn't start crying when his rabbi is pushing him, speak. Normally he didn't start
that's a good
crying all the
point.
time. Yeah. So here I think that there really is an internal change, and I think maybe this is the deep message here. We have all the capacity of deep internal change.
Yeah. And that it seems like the fact that he doesn't respond by crying seems to mean that he feels like he has words and wants to communicate what he wants to say. And,
It also seems that part of his block is that he can't speak when people he sees as his betters or they respect are there. Like when his father speaks to him, he can't respond. Before he doesn't respond, he can't respond the first time. And then he finally gets to respond a little bit to his father, and then he gets over that. And then when Rabbi Yochanan tells him to do it, he can't do it until Rabbi Yochanan leaves. It's like something about those people being in his presence while that's happening that's preventing him as well.
Yeah.
And once he gets over it, he can do it then. Because when Rabbi Yochanan comes back, he has no problem giving this whole Shiur to his father at the end.
Yeah.
So once he can do it once without them, he can do it again when they're there.
Right, and then you wonder, did he even see his father when he started teaching, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't, because his father's kind of sitting
Well,
there as
even
part
then,
of
maybe his father's has changed so much in his perspective. His perspective on his father's changed so much since he's been there that Rabbi Yochanan is not a person in his life, and he can't do it with Rabbi Yochanan around.
Yeah.
And his father doesn't matter in that way.
Yeah, and I think there's also something powerful about the idea that until, if you haven't yet started to do something and somebody already tells you that you can't, that's much harder to counter, right? Once you've kind of begun it and you sort of have a little bit of a sense of your abilities, then if somebody says you can't do it, you can respond kind of more strongly. But I think if you haven't even begun yet, right, it seems as if he has enough insecurity that when his father says you can't do it, it's hard for him to respond. Yeah, please.
But to our purposes this evening, he frames it as the end as if he's asked from Hashem this gift. But nowhere in the story does he ask Hashem for this gift. He simply states that he wants to do this. And then come along other people, and Elijah, and either try to take him off track or further him off track. At the end of it, he then says, as he sees it in life, that he's asked Hashem, and and because of that asking, he was enabled to study Torah.
So that's a great question. And one of the things that reminds me of a lot is there's this really interesting moment during the Seder night where, if you remember, what happens in the Seder is that we use the verses, actually from this week's Parsha, to retell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? And in the Haggadah it says, "Vanitzak el Hashem Elokeinu," right? We cried out to God. And then the proof text for that is the people of Israel are working really hard, and they cry out from their work, right? Vayanchu mina avodah, vata'al shavatam el Hashem, and their cries kind of go up to heaven. And there, right, in the verses in Exodus, at no point are the people of Israel praying to God to be released from captivity. They're just kind of crying out. But then kind of in retrospect, when we tell the story, we tell it as if what we were doing when we were crying was kind of crying out to God. And I wonder if something similar is going on over here, right? Eliezer, you're totally right. In the beginning of the story, he's just crying. But it almost seems that by the end of the story, when he's looking back on that, he sort of sees his crying as a form of kind of crying out to God, which I think happens sometimes, right? When we kind of think back over our own story, right? We kind of sometimes interpret certain parts of it differently based on what's come afterwards.
Totally. And I think that it sort of muddies, but I don't mean that negatively, the understanding in this story at least of what tshuva is. Because it's not in this story a formal, let's just for the purposes of, this is a form of tshuva he's doing, and then he's finding his true self or something. It's not help me out, Hashem, I can't do this without you, tell me study Torah. There's a kind of inchoate desire that the world takes him on then. And afterwards he understands that to be that he prayed to Hashem. So, but it's not at all, the journey doing that is not clear.
Yeah.
So, and yet at this period, it's as if we're trying to be clear, like that we're we're not just gonna like sit in fields and cry and like hope that we get taken on a river to the, So I feel like what Elul is different than this, but maybe not. Like maybe you're reading the story because maybe Elul is as muddy, and I mean that not negatively, or not linear, or not as this story is.
Yeah. That was exactly what I was trying to suggest, right? I think, there are some things that we know very clearly that we want, right? And those are not so hard to, pray for or to try to affect. But I think a lot of us have things that, we can't even put into words, right? There's just sort of a sense that we would like this part of ourselves or this part of our lives to somehow be different than it is. And it feels to me that what this story is suggesting is that kind of the first step towards that is trying to be able to put it into words, right? Because if what you're doing is just kind of yearning, but you don't have a way to describe it, it's very hard to then, no one can kind of help you with that, right? It's hard to get on to the next step unless you're able to kind of say to yourself what it is that you most want, right? And I think the story is about kind of uncovering kind of what is it that you most want, and then kind of finding the help that you need in order to kind of get to where you're going. And I think the story kind of ends with the possibility of it really happening, right? Eliezer's story seems to be the kind of almost like the cheering part of the this is really something that could be possible. Just Agi, did you have a point before? No. Okay, great. Just to kind of counter the Eliezer narrative, if we just look very quickly for 1 or 2 minutes at the Rabbi Akiva story, the thing that I think is really interesting about the Rabbi Akiva story is that, well, we'll just read the first 3 or 4 lines, right? We're told Rabbi Akiva, Raya de ben Kalba Savua Haba. Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Kalba Savua. Kalba Savua, remember, appeared in our story about Eliezer as one of the important wealthy men at Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's kind of big festival. So Rabbi Akiva is described as the shepherd of ben Kalba Savua. Chazite Brate, and the daughter of Kalba Savua sees Rabbi Akiva and sees about him, Dahavat Tzania Umale, she sees that he is modest and refined. And so she says to him, if I were to agree to be betrothed to you, Azlat Lebeirav, will you go off and learn Torah? Amar La'im, he says, yeah, sure, right? And then the story kind of continues where she gets betrothed to him, he goes off to learn Torah, and eventually he becomes a great scholar and kind of goes on with their eventual reunion. But what I think is really interesting about the Rabbi Akiva story is that it's very different than Eliezer, right? Eliezer knows that there's something that he really wants, and it's about how is he going to get from this feeling of kind of general desire for Torah to actually being able to do it. And in the Akiva story, you don't get the sense that Rabbi Akiva thought twice about learning Torah, right? He's kind of a shepherd, he seems to be okay with that. But then when Kalba Savua's daughter kind of makes him this offer, he is willing to kind of seize the opportunity that comes his way, right? And it doesn't seem like he even is saying yes because he wants to learn Torah. It seems like he wants to marry this woman, and if the way to do it is to learn Torah, he's willing to kind of do that as well. And I think that that's actually kind of a second message that's kind of interesting, right? On the one hand, right, during Elul, we have the sense of we want to have a plan, we want to figure out what are the things we most want to change and figure out how we're going to get ourselves to there, which is really important. But I think the Rabbi Akiva story also talks about the importance of kind of being open to things that you didn't know you wanted, right? Being open in the upcoming year to opportunities that come your way that you might not have even thought of as something that you would want, but can also actually make a really positive transformational change in your life. And so I think it's interesting to kind of see those two stories side by side, right? One is being about kind of uncovering the deepest desire of your heart and figuring out how to get to it, and the other one being, or sometimes things just kind of come your way and you have to kind of be open to the possibility of something working out in a way that you hadn't planned for. Yeah?
I striking that in both stories, the other people, and let's include Elijah in that, are critical in the transformation.
Yeah.
More critical than we overtly see Hashem be, right? Like neither case would they have happened without all these other people who are like, she sends him to study and Yochanan ben Zakkai agrees to teach him, right? And so it's not, I just find that striking.
Yeah, I think that it's really important, right? There's a sense that no one becomes a Torah scholar on their own in a vacuum. It's always that many different people are part of that, a part of that process, and they're not necessarily the people who you would even think would be the people who are part of the process. Yeah, totally. Okay, so I think we should stop soon in order to have there be time for singing and then for Selichot. But I guess I just want to end with the bracha that it's a year for us where we're able to kind of articulate the things that we most want and figure out kind of how to get support and strength to be able to have those desires kind of come true and enact the changes that we want. And also that, like Rabbi Akiva, we're kind of also kind of open to things that we don't even know that we want, but could be wonderful in the upcoming year. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that. It was so great. Thanks.
Everyone, I'm so happy you're here. The next part of tonight is going to be